Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this. There was a slightly, I thought, kind of scared hush because you came in and you found a bloke sitting on the stage who looked like Logan Roy, like nervous. Anyone who's got a family is actually already getting quite anxious here.
So they should. So they should.
So the framing of course, this is Brian Cox. I think woo, come on, yeah, of course. One or two people here seem to have seen a couple of things you've done. And Shakespeare to Succession is our topic, but it's also your personal journey, Brian, that I really want to dive into with you today. From your upbringing in Dundee to the world of Logan Roy, such a long way away in every possible sense of what that reflects, and your experiences along the way. And I suppose I thought I would start by saying to you, when people are wandering around here, because Brian Cox, and their minds are going to Logan Roy, you once said to me that you'd lost your anonymity.
Yeah.
And does that still, is that registered with you, and if so, how?
It's the great thing about Logan Roy is I've lost my anonymity, but I've also learned to say no. I could never say no. I would always say, in fact, there was an example just now when a young man came up to me, perfectly nice, and said, can I have you do a video of me telling me to fuck off? and it's the nicest thing to tell people. Because when they're a nuisance, you say, oh, fuck off. And, so it's very simple. So I didn't tell this young man to fuck off, but I said, I'm sorry, I can't do your video, I haven't got time. And maybe I'll do it later, and then I can tell him.
So that sounds like Logan, maybe we'll go that way, and of course I want to wind back the camera as well, and also talk about many other roles. But it does sound like, I would have thought he was a bit of a mixed blessing in your life, but if it enables you to cut to the chase in that kind of conversation, but how much does he inhabit your thoughts?
Not very much. I don't believe that, I'm not one of these actors who over-identify with their roles. I think that way madness lies. So it's just a great part, and it is a wonderful part. And the great thing about playing Logan is he's a mystery. He's a mystery to himself as much as anybody else. And that's what's appealing, and that's where you know that you're playing someone who isn't fully there, fully present. Is present in one sense, but in another sense you don't know who he is, you don't know where he's coming from. And then you have all these little clues which Jesse Armstrong has put in about his background, but it's never dwelt on. It never is dwelt on. So in a way, from the actor's point of view, it gives you a wonderful sense of scope in terms of how to play the role. And the role is, it's a gift. It really is. It's not challenging in any way. And of course, it appeals to my inner Logan Roy, because I think we've all got, so much of the time I really would like to tell people to fuck off in a real way.
It sounds like you've already indulged yourself at the Clifton Festival.
That's the plus side of playing Logan, that my swearing has increased considerably as a result. But no, it's a gift of a role, and also, given what we're about to talk about in the lineage of one's work, it became very important because, I've had a great career, I've had a very lucky career, so I have no complaints. But suddenly when you get a role like that, which puts you in the public spotlight, apart from the anonymity question, it realizes, you suddenly felt, Sally Field said, they like me, No, I didn't really mean that at all. But you just realize this is something that is, but of course, as from an actor's point of view, it's ongoing. Logan Roy is just one stop on the way to wherever, and I'm still, I've got stuff ahead of me that I still want to do.
Which we'll talk about in a second. Octavius Black is an entrepreneur who founded something called the Mind Gym, so behavioural psychology expert, and has built a business around it. Said to me last night something I hadn't thought about, and I guess a lot of people here are big Succession watcher, and I think about it a lot, but I hadn't thought that what he said, that the 4 archetypes are there in the children of fight, flight, freeze, our sort of therapy speak, and fawning, which I guess is sort of the Shiv character, where you're always sort of ducking and diving and trying to please. Do you think this was deliberate to have a sort of psychological underpinning to these characters? I mean, obviously, the show was co-created, and Jesse Armstrong there sort of drives it, but it does feel like you fed in quite a lot.
Well, I mean, there are archetypes. I mean, there's no question that certainly Logan is an archetype. I mean, he's very much in the, I mean, if we talk about Shakespeare, he's very much in the line of King Lear, or those roles, those imperious roles. I mean, Ibsen has a lot of these characters as well, you know, Rubeck, and a lot of the characters. So, and I've played quite a few of them, the Master Builder, Solness. So there are these self-made creative men who've created their own empire. And of course, the problem is the children in terms of what they inherit. And of course, one of the things that we are seeing so clearly now in our culture is this notion of entitlement, that these kids who are entitled to, you know, be monstrous in a way and have no sense of the world. And that's one thing that is clearly in the show. Those kids are, you know, they are lost in a way, but they're lost because they've been put in a position where they haven't been able to assess the world in its own terms. They assess it in terms of their own wealth and their own entitlement, really. And of course, Logan's his kind of Achilles heel is the fact that he loves his children. If he didn't love his children, it would be so much easier, because then he would be able to pursue a path. But he can't, because he does love these horrible children. He really does love them. And they are pretty fucking horrible, you know.
In a compelling, horrible way. It's actually when we were in the second series and we were chatting, and I was quite surprised when you said he loved his children. So you seemed very sure about that. But and this does bring us perhaps to that arc to someone like Lear, which I mentioned in a moment. I first went on the road with you in the National Theatre when you were playing Lear a few decades ago. It's about 3 decades ago. But the same problem there. When you say that they love their children, it seems like the relationship to me not quite as unambiguous.
Well, no, I mean, it was very, I asked that question because I thought he could be so vile and so cruel to his children, seemingly. But Jesse was very clear that he absolutely insisted, no, he loves his children.
Interesting.
And that is his Achilles heel, the fact that he does love those children. And of course, it's so difficult because he's trying to figure them into the world, and it's very hard for them to figure in the world because he knows that there are certain things that he's not prepared them for, you know, that he's guilty of. And he never admits to that guilt, and he would never ever, and that guilt is never said or declared in the show, but it's all the underpinning of who he is. You know? And
does that take you then mentally to the world of Shakespeare, which you've acted for many years on some of the great stages, and the kind of Lear-like nature of power and patriarchal power in a family? It struck me that Lear kind of gets rid of the empire foolishly, that course, and in succession, Logan's always trying to hold on to it. But there does seem to be a commonality.
The commonality is that conflict. In a way, I mean, I think that Logan would dearly like to get rid of his empire, but only on certain terms, on his terms. Lear does the same. He does get rid of his empire, but he's trying to make deals with his daughter, saying, well, give me these 50 men, I can do this, I can have a sense of freedom within this new structure. And in a way, Logan will never get to that because the children are so impossible and difficult and kind of they've got such, I mean, and then there's the incidents that happened in the first series when the son accidentally kills the boy. And of course, that's given Logan power over his son in one way, but also it's given him a burden in another way. So there's a sort of constant, inwardly, a push me, pull you that goes on for the character of Logan. And I think Lear has a similar thing. Lear is, he's so, he just wants to get rid of it all. He wants to but then he can't quite let go. And it's that thing that people do have where they mean well, but they can never quite let go. And it's a sort of human failing in a way.
Let's talk a bit about Shakespeare in the round. I mean, tell us I think I first saw you on that National Theatre tour we were on together, and you might do better than me on this. It was after the fall of the wall. We were in Yugoslavia. Yugoslavia was about to disintegrate, and there you were. And these were very memorable productions that you were involved in at the time. And I was struck by the fact then, and we'd only just got to know each other in Romania as well. I think we went on to Romania. That you seemed to have a mission about taking Shakespeare with you and taking it into contexts that were evolving.
Yeah.
Is that to the way that you remember it?
Yeah, to a certain extent. I mean, when you do a world tour of something, you have to take on the environment that you're working in. And I remember when we went to Romania, Bucharest, and Ceausescu had just been murdered, killed. Well, I mean, he'd had the firing squad, both him and his wife. So there was this sort of sense of newness, but also kind of awkwardness. Didn't quite know where it was going to go. And so when you come in with that, we were also doing Richard III.
Yes.
So when we played the National Theatre, we got such incredible compliments about how it reflected on their situation. And that's what the theatre does. I mean, the theatre to me is, in many ways, sacred, because it is about the human experience. And that's why we go to the theatre. We go to the theatre to see it reflects who we are. And, Shakespeare says it all. I mean, if you want to know about acting and you want to know about responsibility, all you have to do is, read Hamlet's advice to the players. In Hamlet's advice to the players, he talks about the whole thing. He talks about how to speak, what to speak, how not to overdo it. And also the most important thing of all is to hold the mirror up to nature. And I think that's what we do in the theatre. That's our job, is to hold the mirror up to nature on a constant and continuing level. And that's the exciting thing. That's why, to me, I love the theatre, and I'm very proud that that is the culture of this country. These islands is the theatre. More in America, it's the cinema. It's not the theatre in the same way, because they haven't had a very good. I mean, they haven't got a sense of state theatre like we have, And so that makes it somewhat difficult. Theatre is there's an element in America, it's very ad hoc. It's not, I mean, like if you do a play in LA, they call it a sort of an opportunity to show yourself off rather than actually do a bloody play, And that's something which is really hard, for Americans to get round. And this, I mean, for me, it was always the cinema as a child, because I was working class. That was what my access was. And the theatre was very middle class. And it had, in fact, Anthony Page described the audience at the Dundee Rep when I arrived. Oh yeah, you're here with the Felties. And I said, what are the Felties? Who are the Felties? They're the ladies in the audience who wear the felt hats. And that was, in those days in the 60s, women, nobody wears hats nowadays, but in those days they all wore hats. And that was their brand for the theatre. So the theatre had that element to it, but the cinema was much more egalitarian in many ways. And that's stuck with me, that notion of what cinema does. And it crosses boundaries in a way, particularly American cinema. British cinema, I was never interested in Kenneth More or Dirk Bogarde or any of that. Those British films, they meant nothing to me. And as a Scot, they meant even less. American films, because I'm partly Irish, that also came across. So it was a very interesting development that when I came into the theatre, it shifted, because suddenly there was a bigger platform and a kind of truer platform from where I was coming from that I could serve. And that's what I sort of gone on and did. So by the time I was 22, I'd played, I mean, rather badly, I have to say, but I'd played Iago, Mercutio, Orlando, Bolingbroke, and Peer Gynt, all in that space of time. Now, that's unheard of now. A young actor couldn't do that. But that was the structure of the time. That's why the 60s was the age it was,
If we'd been in the audience for any of those, because I was about to ask you what your first Shakespeares were, and you just referenced a couple there. And you said badly, that's judging your young self pretty harshly, I think. But what would we have seen? What would this actor have been like?
It's not...
Give us a flavour of him.
No, you do it to your best.
Yeah.
I mean, and it's not going to be because of your experience. And that's how you learn. You learn on the job. You learn by doing and missing. I mean, I say badly, but I'm probably being very modest.
You probably are. I think you probably are. I suppose the kind of curiosity I'd be is what is, apart from doing it again and again in different directors, in different contexts, and just getting better at it across life. I asked this question to Roger Federer, and he once said, well, I just had to do it every day for a long time. And I'm quite good, and I got very good.
And every game is different. And that's the thing, and that's what people, when people say to me, oh, it's so repetitive in the theatre, and I go, bollocks, it's not. Because every night is a different, because of the audience. And that's the most important element, is the audience makes the transformation of that night. There's a sort of, this happened to me when I was 3. When I was 3, my dad, being a Scot, we celebrate New Year, so we celebrate Hogmanay. It's a big festivity. And at New Year time, our small flat in my hometown of Dundee was always full of people. It was packed with people. And everybody did a turn, everybody did a song, everybody performed in some way or another. That's what they did in the 40s and 50s. And my sister, who was a beautiful singer, my sister May, would get me out of bed at 1 o'clock in the morning, and I would come on and I would perform. And in those days, nobody knows who this guy is anymore, but I used to do Al Jolson impersonations at the age of 3. And, somebody
which would be quite risky now, I think.
So I would do these impersonations and go mammy, climb up on, I used to sing, climb up on my knees, sonny boy. Although you're only 3, sonny boy. And I sang that as a 3-year-old, which seems slightly nonsensical, but it worked, and the audience loved. But the effect was the effect in the room. And that's the thing I remember more than anything else, was how a harmony came into the room in a way that had not been there. Everybody been chatting before, everybody been focused, but the focus of that one person, just like you all now are doing and focusing. And you go, that's gold. You can't get round that, what that means. So that's why anytime one plays in the theatre, it's always a different experience, because it's a different harmony. It's a different group of people, and it's very exciting.
I was about to use the phrase breakthrough role, which I know most of my actor friends absolutely hate, because by the time that critics, I write a monthly theatre column, and they said, by the time we've discovered the breakthrough role, we've done 20 great things. Yeah. Do you look back on a production, or perhaps an entry into television or film, where you looked at yourself one day in the mirror and thought, Christ, Brian Cox, this is really working now?
Well, yeah, I had several times when I felt, that I made I had a very bad time in the 70s at the National Theatre under Peter Hall. It's not so much Peter Hall's fault, but it was just the whole circumstances of a new National Theatre, and I did a dreadful production of, it was probably not as bad as I thought, because I always exaggerate, but I did a production of Julius Caesar, directed by John Schlesinger. Now, John Schlesinger was a very good director, but he wasn't a theatre director. He worked in film, and he was a great delegator. That was how he operated as a director. So he had a great editor, he had a great writer, he had all those elements that you can do in cinema, which you can't necessarily do in theatre, because you've got to have that singular view of purpose. So he was a little bit lost, and I felt that he was slightly dealt as a sort of sacrificial lamb by Peter Hall. I thought Peter Hall put him in an impossible position with a lot of very young and very exciting actors, Ronnie Pickup, a whole bunch of actors. Good night. Bladders are a terrible thing.
Yeah, that is. It's definitely coming back for more. Family emergency.
But
the Roy thing, you've just terrified.
No, so no, it was really kind of that time. So I then went to work at the Riverside Studios with Peter Gill, and I did a production of The Changeling, and that had an enormous effect on me, because I suddenly thought, oh, maybe I can act. I played Brutus. I remember playing Brutus, and we got notices like gang of youths, and John Gielgud plays Caesar. So we've got gang of youths mug old man and Waterloo, a plot to kill off the best verse speaker in the English language. I mean, the reviews were apparently terrible. I never saw them, because some people always tell you, even, oh, did you read? No, I didn't anyway. So, but then I got a card from Peter Hall, and this is what the card said. He sent it with a Mercury messenger on a motorcycle saying, "I don't care what they say, I still believe in you." Now, you can, oh, that's a nice thing, but you go, no, it isn't really. It's a sort of control thing, that he said, "I still believe in you, you'll be fine." But I knew this was not the environment for me. That National Theatre was not the environment.
I think it's like the worst thing people could ever say to you is, "I was defending you the other day."
Exactly. It's the same thing.
Sort of thing that would one of the Roys might say, "Yeah, I was defending you in some way." But that is interesting that how personal you find that relationship to be with a director or the artistic director of a theatre.
Yeah, and Gill, Peter Gill is a genius at text. And that's to me what the key element of acting is. It's the text, it's the words, and how you interpret those words, and what the possibility of those words are. It's like going back to Hamlet. I just made a huge discovery about Hamlet, which is the speech I pray you is immediately after, well, it's a little time after, he's watched the old actor manager do his stuff. And I suddenly thought, oh, I see. It's a sort of, even though he's very moved by it, it's a sort of critique of that kind of acting, saying, keep it simple.
Do you remember it off the top of your head?
Pardon?
Do you remember a couple of lines off the top of your head?
Well, I'd speak the speech I pray you as I pronounced it to you, trippingly on the tongue. But if you mouth it, as many of my players do, and as lief the town crier spoke my lines. And then, but be not too tame either. Use suit the word to the action to the word with this, and then it goes on.
I got extra value.
I did.
Do you see? I sneaked that one in. I just want little bits of.
I could probably read it. My wife says she's got it there. Because I did talk about it. I talked about it the other day because I was doing a lecture to a bunch of students at Lambda, and I'll read it for you. Have you got it? Thank you. Oh, careful!
Sorry.
Don't knock the time.
I like to think you sit there in the front with it, just ready at
no,
any
she
time.
Didn't.
Thank you so much. This is enjoyable.
Oh God, of course I needed to say. So it goes like this. Speak the speech, I pray you, as I pronounced it to you, trippingly on the tongue. But if you mouth it, as many of your players do, I had as lief the town crier spoke my lines. Nor do not saw the air too much with your hand thus, but use all gently, for in the very torrent, tempest, and as I may say, whirlwind of your passion, you must acquire and beget a temperance that may give it smoothness. Oh, it offends me to the soul to hear a robustious, periwig-pated fellow tear a passion to tatters, to very rags, to split the ears of the groundlings, who for the most part are capable of nothing but inexplicable dumb shows and noise. I would have such a fellow whipped for o'erdoing termagant. Without Herod's Herod, pray you, avoid it. But to be not too tame neither, but let your own discretion be your tutor. Suit the action to the word to the action, with this special observance: o'erstep not the modesty of nature. For anything so overdone from the purpose of playing, whose end both at first now was and is to hold as 'twere the mirror up to nature. That's it.
Did you get the part? I think you got the part. I don't think we need to audition anyone else.
But what that speech does is it tells you the whole story about what your responsibility is as an actor, but not just as an actor, in life. The truth about how you sell something, how you tell something, how you tell a story, that you don't overstep the bounds of modesty. And this is what I believe is the root of what we should be doing as actors, and it's what our job is. And it's for the audience to interpret it the way they interpret it,
You've touched on a time that was difficult, and he said that the National Theatre at that time in the 70s just it wasn't for you, it wasn't the right mix for you. And if you, because in your book, which I say we will be waving about at the end, but it's excellent autobiography, putting the rabbit in the hat, triumphs and disasters, because this is a six-decade career, really, isn't it? Are there shows or experiences? It was more, I think, that National Theatre is kind of a time, but just stand it out in your mind. And if you were to have those dreams where you either dream the sort of peak of what just made you feel great, or the one that didn't, or the audition that was awful, what would they be?
Well, it was just, you have a vision of yourself when you're young, and you see how you're going to develop and where you're going to go to, and then you run out. You do it for the first 10 years and you think, now what? What do I do now? And of course, treading the path through the British theatre is tough, very, very tough, because it's very demanding. And also styles that come in that you don't necessarily agree with, styles of acting that you think, why the fuck is he acting like that? Why is he doing that? What is this all about? Demonstrating what you're doing. And I don't believe in demonstration. I believe in doing.
What springs to mind there?
I wouldn't go there.
You can't blame me for trying.
No names, no pack drill. I wouldn't go there. It's too. Anyway, I'll pass on that. No, so you try and work out where your place is, and it's very difficult when, Tony Hopkins, for example, he had this real problem as a younger actor, trying to find his place, because they kept pushing him in directions that he didn't want to go, and he was very angry about the Cambridge graduates that they were telling him how to act, and he just got and he's Welsh, and his Welshness was what was his creative force. That was what he did. So eventually, he had it too much, and he was doing very well. He had a big career, possible career in the theatre, and he was doing the Scottish play. And in the middle of it, he felt that he was pushed over the brink, and he left. He went to America and disappeared for 10 years, and then came back and did Pravda, and was amazing, that production of Pravda that David Hare and Howard Brenton wrote. And that acting that Tony does, which is extraordinary. But then again, he was visited by the same old that he'd seen in the past. And finally he said, I'd rather be in the desert, being there in the desert, just experienced, and he loves the West Coast of America. And I could understand it, what he meant, and I think it was tough for him. It's a different path for me. I just won't give up. I won't run away. I did when I was 50. I finally decided I wanted to do film, so I decided to go to America then. But at the same time, I've not let go that desire to go forward, and Tony was, he was hurt by it, very hurt. And yet, he is astonishingly, infinitely more talented than me. He can write, he can compose, he's a great musician, he's a great painter. So and that's actually allowed him, that environment has allowed him to be who he wants to be. And I think that's what you do. You spend your life trying to find the right environment and where you can do it. Now, I think that's one of the advantages of doing the show, Succession, that finally you're in the right environment. Most of the writers are British, even though it's an American show. There are a few Americans to take care of the vernacular elements. But they are writing, and they're writing in a very strong satirical line, which is what they're creating on that show. Because it's a satirical show. It's a satire on the modern times and about where we're living at the moment. So that I felt, finally, this was something that was important and something that I could really be part of and contribute to. So I in a way, it's been great because it's given me an extraordinary fillip in a way. But at the same time, it's realized where I was going. It's one of the stops along the way, and I think, yes, This is right. This feels good. This has felt good all the way through.
You're using the present tense there about Succession. Does that mean we're in for another enjoyable series?
Yeah, we'll do the 4th season next start, I think, in March. We're filming it at the moment, so I mean, you wouldn't believe this, but this week alone, I had to go to LA. So I left on Tuesday, arrived on Tuesday afternoon, filmed on Wednesday, and then got the flight back on Wednesday night to here. So I did 22 hours in less than 48 hours.
Extraordinary. Can you work in
this? Yeah, I love it. I actually love it. I thrive on this. I thrive on that kind of pressure. You know, I love pressure. I mean, I don't know why, but I do. And you know, I'm a certain age now, but it's actually made me younger, if anything else. You know, I like being older because I feel a lot younger now.
Oh, no, that's very uplifting, actually, for all of us who've got birthday coming.
No, absolutely. I think we're all. You know, when I played Lear, one of the things I did when I played Lear, and what I observed, because Lear is old, and old in that time was really old. And what I did was, I remember I was observing people at the airports. Old people come to airports, and you look at them and they're going, you know, they're all right, they're fine. And finally, they're given a wheelchair. And when they get in the wheelchair, you know, they walk up and they're okay. Oh yes, okay, a wheelchair. Oh yes, all right, fine. So they walk up and they think, oh, okay, yes, all right. And they sit in the wheelchair. They immediately become old. And I thought, this is what we do. Yeah. We look around, it's like, I think the worst thing that we do in this country is care homes. I think care homes are truly awful places. And I'll tell you why I think they're awful. Old people need stimulus. Yeah. They don't need a bunch of people who are at the same stage and have the same sort of desperation that they have. They need something to get them out. So my sister's in a care home, which is a beautiful care home, and I have no quarrel with the people who work there because they are real saints, the people who work there. But the system of a care home is actually defeating how you make those last years of your life. You know, it doesn't help. It sort of pushes you into a thing. So that there you are with fellow people. You maybe have a touch of dementia. You may have a little bit of Alzheimer. You may have a little bit, and you have your own culture, but you can't get the stimulus that you need. And people need stimulus, and they need stimulus of the young, stimulus of other people. So the whole notion of care homes is sort of, you know, they're kind of self-exploding, you know, they kind of defeat themselves at the end of the day.
You remind us, with that reflection, that you're also very engaged in debate, social, political debate. Yeah. You're in committee. Did anyone see Brian Cox on Question Time a couple of weeks ago? Pretty good, wasn't he? Thank you. Yeah, you've got the audience really. You know, you were very strongly. I think you were talking about police reform. That was a big subject that week, and it just reminded me that you're very eclectic in your political interest. So, in that sense, as a political animal or observer, how would you describe yourself?
Well, I'm socialist and proud of it. I believe my father, and I get that from my father. He was that way, but it didn't help him because he trusted people too much. My mother used to say to him, you know, well, she used to say to me actually, she said, "Remember, Brian, charity begins at home." So there was this conflict between my father and my mother, and then when my father died rather early, he was only 51 and he had pancreatic cancer, and he died within 3 weeks of his diagnosis. And it was a huge shock to my mum. I mean, and she collapsed completely. And she felt that she'd pushed him too far. But you know, he was ill. He was clearly ill. But so she had a massive series of nervous breakdowns, and she had to have electric shock treatment. So the reverberation of that throughout my childhood was, in many ways, it was, you know, if you look at it, you say, how horrific. And my sister said, "Oh, Brian, you've come through so much." But the interesting thing is, I was surviving. I didn't feel what everybody else was feeling for me around me. I was just getting on with it. You know, I could see that I was in a pretty bloody awful situation. I just thought, you've just got to learn to cope. You've got to learn to deal with it. And those kind of muscles kick in, and that's how I survived. And my survival mechanism is pretty strong and has been my entire life. So I'm very grateful for it. I'm very grateful for the fact that even though it was horrific and I lost to the very dearest people in my life, I was also grateful for the fact that the gift it gave me at the same time. You know, I didn't realize that at the time. I just was getting on with it. But then in reflection, I go, oh my God, I got through that. How did I do that? I just did, you know.
I noticed last night when we were, it must be said, there was occasionally a glass of wine was taken last night. It was a pretty small one, but occasionally we had a drink last night, Friday. And you had a Scottish flag in your lapel. You're a supporter of Scottish independence.
Well, it's only something because I've come to. I mean, it's not something, I was very against it for a very long time. And I used to make jokes about how can you be President Sir Sean Connery? It doesn't really make sense. But I just seen the way my country has been treated time and time again as a sort of ball to be batted around. And we're a small nation. And also and the last thing, the Scottish National Party was a joke when I was a kid. It was just, it was men in kilts and skiing doos in their socks. That's what it was all about. And I just thought, oh, that's not me, I couldn't be doing with it. But then I realized there were other mitigating factors about why we require our own nation again. And I think it's true of the Celts. I think the Celts have been introduced historically for far too long. And I include myself. The Irish, we're the same people. We're exactly, and I've had my DNA done, and I'm 88% Irish, 12% Scots, 100% Celt. So that's who I am.
It's,
so
it's a bit of a Celtish stage,
McElvoy. Yeah, exactly, McElvoy, exactly.
We probably end up being like third cousins 12 times removed in about 80.
Well, everybody, I was talking to Sebastian Barry just now, and everybody is related to a character in Ireland, and I found this out, is related to a character called Niall of the Nine Hostages. And Niall was a guy who had 9 hostages, but he was the progenitor for the whole of the Irish race, and seemingly like.
It's a whole mini-series, isn't it?
No, it could be a mini-series, yeah. But one of his hostages was St. Patrick. And St. Patrick got free, and then St. Patrick made the foolish mistake of coming back to Ireland well, it wasn't a foolish mistake, it was a good mistake, but no, interesting.
But are you more or less hopeful now, and also thinking about our last panel in the entire context of the instability of politics in the UK, that the SNP, the Scottish independence, is on the horizon? Because in some ways it seems to be getting the possibility further away if a Labour government comes in on dramatic circumstances.
I know Keir Starmer will not have any truck with it because he's trying to sellotape something together which has been broken for a very, very, very long time. And I admire because I'm at heart a socialist, so in a way I'm pulled by that direction. But I did say to him, I said, when we do become independent, there will be a Labour Party in Scotland and I will be joining it,
It's a when for you. You're not thinking, well, this is what I'd like, but
No, I think there's a when because I think there's never been the atmosphere right for it now, and especially in the wake of what's been happening in this present government, and what happened with the Liar of Eton before, So I think that really we've learned so many horrible lessons, and now we see this. I don't know how to describe her really. This person who they've made Prime Minister, who is clearly problematic. But then it goes back to her childhood. You realize this is a woman whose parents were fierce CND supporters, quite liberal, and so as a reaction, she's taken something else. And there's a kind of clear, there's a sort of unhappiness deep down somewhere about who she was and who she came from, and she's actually redressing it in the opposite way. And I go, that's an interesting part to play. Because it's a good role. Liz Truss is a good role. It is a good role because there's a lot in it,
I would say in this era of gender-blind casting, whether you're suggesting yourself or...
No, I wouldn't suggest that I should play. But I think, a really good actress would have a good time with it,
Who would you cast? Give me your full casting power.
Now I would... Oh, that's an idea, actually. I hadn't thought about it. What?
Oh, look, the guy...
You want to play Liz Truss? It's the part is yours. And you don't even have to audition.
You got it. There you go. It's all done. Little haircut and you're off. So you've had a 10 seconds to think. Who would you see as Liz Truss?
Well, I would have thought, I'm trying to think of somebody who's younger. Maxine Peake. I think.
Did that go down well? Yeah.
She's such an extraordinary actress. She really is such
She's
a
even more
gifted
left-wing
actress.
than you are.
Pardon?
She's more left-wing than you are.
She is.
That's saying something.
But she's wonderful. But she would actually understand, and it would be a great journey for her, because she'd have to make that woman real, you know. And she herself has a difficulty of making herself real.
I mean, I'm going to go to the audience in a minute because we must get some questions here. There's really a lot of a response in the room to what you've been talking about, Brian. But it was just that point on this, a lot of the way that you interpret characters seems to go back to childhood. You talked about your own childhood. You talked about the back story of Logan Roy. You've talked about it in great place. But I did wonder that when you said that about Liz Truss, isn't it possible that people just decide that they have a direction and a set of beliefs, and may not be a reaction to her parents?
No.
I mean, I suppose what I'm trying to say is that a fair assessment of Liz Truss?
But your beliefs come from something.
Yeah.
You know, they come from conditioning. You cannot avoid conditioning. We're all, and it's, you know, sometimes it's too deep for even us to understand, but we are all conditioned in one way or another to have the beliefs that we believe, you know, and usually it goes back to childhood. Usually it goes back to, I'm doing a documentary at the moment on money, because I thought playing Logan Roy, I have to do the corollary to that. And it's about the wealth gap. And it was one of the most painful things I've ever done, because I had to go into community larders in Scotland. I had to go into these terrible places in Harlem. I went into a soup kitchen, a wonderful place in the Bronx. I spent horrible time in Miami, which is a truly disgusting place to be, and seeing the wealth there and how it's, anyway.
Is the Miami Herald here?
but also, what was interesting is the fact that the gap between people is so huge now, and the gap between the rich and the poor is so huge. And it's interesting, you know, she talks about trickle-down economics. It doesn't work. It simply doesn't work. And most rich people aren't interested in trickle-down economics. A lot of rich people would say, tax us, do tax us. Now, in the 60s, we had a very good wealth tax. And the balance in the world, and especially in this country, the balance was very good, very well created. Nowadays, it's so crazy. And when you go into these food larders, I went into this food larder in Scotland, in Dundee, and the food larders, they're called community larders, not food larders, and they're there ostensibly to give people back dignity. Because what the food banks have done have taken away dignity from people. You know, they feel that they're in a beggar mode, that they're going into a situation to beg for food, and it destroys the inner person. So what they do is they have these setups where you get £2 for tin goods, £4 for tin and dry goods, and then £6 for tin, dry, and other goods, soft goods, and stuff. And so these people come in and they do it, and it's beautifully run by these two ladies who ran a play group in Dundee. And this guy came in, this man, and he was quite emaciated, quite thin, had a stick, had a thing on his arm here, a kind of sign of some kind. And he came in, and I interviewed him, and I said, so you're doing this on behalf of your family? And he said, oh, no, I do it because I work for about 15 people over a period of 3 weeks. I do 5 each week. And these are people who cannot get here, who live in these high-rises, older people, and they can't simply get down here. And if they don't get down here, they don't get anything. So I do it on behalf of them. And I said, well, that's amazing. I was very humbled by it. I said, that's extraordinary. So you do it. He said, and I said, why? He said, well, if I didn't do it, nobody else would. And I said, wow. I said, so what is this sign here? And he said, I'm blind. And I just thought, that says it all. That a blind man goes to such an extent, and it's humbling and it's shaming, that you go, wow, that's something else, you know. And this is the thing that in dealing with this program, you're meeting it constantly.
Quite far away from some of the more monstrous characters.
Yeah, absolutely.
It shows that
absolutely.
the extraordinary range.
That's right, and I feel that this is why I wanted to do the program, because I don't want to, you know, I'm so identified with certain, I just wanted to show that this is not who I am this person, not that person.
I can see why you might wish to have a line under that. So let's get some questions for Brian from the audience. Sorry, I am not so great in this light and very long sight.
Hi.
You look like a nice person.
Thank you. It's incredible to be here with you. Thank you so much. I wanted to ask about, you said about the harmony of being on theater and getting that energy from the audience. How do you get that when you're on a film or TV set?
Well, it's a different discipline. Where you get it is with your fellow players. I mean, you get it with your fellow players anyway on stage, but there's a sort of extra dimension because there is no audience and you're playing for one another. And what's great about our show is that we do those scenes like little plays. They're done and they're shot in very, very tight, complete ways, usually 2 cameras either side and moving cameras, great camera operators. And also what we do is we include everybody. We include the crew, so that, for instance, the director will do the shots for the show, and we will all be given our notes. And then he will say, now we'll do a freebie for you, the actors, and you do I don't believe in that myself, but there we go, we do a freebie. But then he'll say to the operators, now we'll do one for the operators. So the operators get to choose what they look at. And sometimes it's really fantastic. It's really interesting. So when you've got that environment, when you know that there's that trust with everybody, then that's like having an audience there. That's exactly the same.
Let's take another question. Yes. Sorry, I'm just pointing to a hand. I know, but not too rude. It's just a little bit dark for me.
Yeah, the light.
I'm just wondering between you and me, nobody else is in the room, does Rupert Murdoch call you at 1 o'clock in the morning to say you did me wrong?
The role has got nothing to do with Rupert Murdoch. Absolutely fuck all to do with Rupert Murdoch. The only incident I've had of that kind of thing that happened was I have an apartment in Primrose Hill in London, and I go to my local Sweet Things for my coffee of a morning, and I was standing there one morning and this voice behind me was saying, well, we're, on the whole, we're really, I think we're really interested in the program. It seems to be working rather well, and I would say we're really enjoying it. And I went, oh, thank you, that's nice. And he said, yes. It's very difficult, I think, sometimes for my wife, but on the whole, she's actually okay with it. I said, well, I'm glad your wife's okay with that. That's good. I said, so who's your wife? He said, Elizabeth Murdoch. And I went, ooh, really? And I thought, actually, it's got nothing to do with Elizabeth Murdoch. And he did actually, his parting words to me, he said, can you make sure the writers are a little nicer to her next season? And I just thought, yeah, you've identified wrongly with the Murdoch, as you just did. And it's, the difference between Logan is self-made. Murdoch was never self-made. He inherited. You'll find most of these people inherited. And what Jesse has done very cleverly is to make Logan self-made. So his journey is a different journey, really, than the possible journey that... and there's no way that Logan Roy would marry Jerry Hall.
Jerry Hall, one might say, or vice versa.
Well, and vice versa. Well, she actually might want to marry him, but too bad, Jerry.
It might have lasted a bit longer, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
All right, let's take in some more questions. Can you see anyone, Mary?
There's a guy up here or somebody. I can't tell if it's a guy or... Oh, it is a guy. Yeah.
Thank you, Brian, for sharing some fantastic insights. You talked a little bit about what you're doing now, but what's next? Are there any particular characters that you're...
Well, I want to get back to the theatre while I still have memory. I'm getting on. And I'm hoping also to direct next year my first movie that I'll direct. And it's a sort of love letter to my homeland. It's called Glenrothen. And it's about a family distillery where I think we're going to film around the Aberfeldy Pitlochry area. I want a kind of lyrical Scotland as opposed to the sort of harsh Highland Scotland. And it's beautiful out there, absolutely stunning. There's a lot of uncharted areas. So that's what I'm going to be trying to do next year, and we're we're in development with Lionsgate, so hopefully that might come to something. And it's looking good. It's looking very good. And then I want to go back to the theatre, so I'm going to do a play about Bach called The Score, which I'm going to do at Bath, Bach in Bath. I'm doing that at the end of next year. And then hopefully in 2020, see, I've got a busy year ahead. And hopefully in 2024, depending on if we go to a 5th season, I don't know we're going to go to one, but we might. But I'm hoping to do Long Day's Journey into Night, Eugene O'Neill, play the old boy, James Tyrone. So that's the plan. But as Burns very rightly said, the best laid schemes of mice and men gang after glide.
Would you ideally go on to the 5th season, or would you think, actually, there'll be one day, I'll just get out of my way?
No, I mean, it's a very, we're a very harmonious bunch. I mean, this is one of the greatest bunches I've ever worked with. So we all love being with one another. So, possibilities are, yeah, absolutely.
Anything else? So we've got a good 5 minutes. So if there's anything else you'd like to ask.
There's a lady here.
To find out from Brian how to learn your lines. There
Yeah.
you go. Hi, hello there.
Hi, I just wanted to ask about the theatre. I mean, your work in the theatre is brilliant, but I suppose the theatre's not particularly accessible. I mean, there are sort of schemes that go on, but, if you were headlining an amazing show in the West End, it might be like, 60, 70, 80 pounds to get to. What do you think we can do to make the theatre more accessible? Does it bother you? Because you could say that with Succession, everyone can kind of watch that, but with the theatre...
Are you talking about the prices of the tickets?
Yeah, like just theatre not being very accessible.
Try and live in
people.
America. Try and live on Broadway. I mean, America. That's why American theatre is really difficult, because it's overpriced. And it gets, a show becomes successful, and then it costs you, I don't know, what is $350 for a ticket, if you go to see Hamilton. Hopefully we could avoid that. But actually there was once upon a time when we were trying desperately to get rid of value-added tax in the theatre, which is, and that also increases the price of a ticket. No, I think that the theatre should be reasonable, and especially now. I mean, one of the problems that has happened, I mean, this is a long discussion, but I'm a product of the 1960s. I'm a product of what was a great time of social mobility, where somebody from my back part of the world, I didn't have any qualifications. I worked in the theatre for 2 years. I was still only 17, because I started just after my 15th birthday at Dundee Rep. And I worked in the theatre. I met a wonderful woman called Kristen Linklater, who was a brilliant voice teacher, sadly no longer with us, passed away. And I decided I wanted to go where she was, and she was at the London Academy of Music and Dramatic Art. So I went down there and auditioned, and I got in. And I had a full grant, not a scholarship. The Scottish Education Authority paid for me. It paid my living expenses, it paid for my fees, and it paid for virtually everything. I was actually quite a wealthy student. In fact, I was wealthier as a student than I was as a worker before. And it was a fantastic time. But that was when the country was just, we'd only been 16, 18 years out of a war, and we'd been pretty poor, but we were still able to pay for people. Nowadays, it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. That's one of the great things about Scotland, which we have free education for university graduates. They can get it for free if they're Scots. They can get it for free. It's another good reason for being on our own, getting away, because we can do that. And we've fiscally thought that through. And it's not thought through enough, really, nowadays. And it's ridiculous what young people have to go through in this country in order to educate themselves. And it needs to be turned around. But of course, they're not going to do it, but they should.
Let's see, there's a last sort of chance for questions, I think. So if there's any...
There's a person waving up there.
Have you got contact lenses?
No.
Well, you just got very good eyesight.
Well, I'm used to being on but this is a bright light. I can understand it, but there's a person there.
You mentioned Anthony Hopkins. Is it more than a coincidence that both you and he have played both Titus Andronicus and Hannibal Lecter?
Well, it is slightly more than a coincidence. I was never tell anybody what you do on stage, because they'll steal it. Not Tony. I'm not talking about Tony, but I'm talking about the director Julie Taymor, who directed Titus Andronicus. And I was long in conversation about playing Titus, because I had played quite a famous Titus Andronicus. In fact, we sort of rewrote the book on Titus Andronicus. I mean, working with the genius that is Deborah Warner, of course, considerably contributed to that. And Tony and I did that. I did the Hannibal Lecter, and Tony then did it later. And I just think it's just one of those things. You know, he's a bit older than me, but it just happened that. Because I remember that Tony and I used to have the same agent. So I remember my agent bringing me up and saying, "I just received this script, which sounds very like the part that you played." And my agent, typical agents, he couldn't remember what the name of the part was. He said, "You know, you did that part. You remember that part in that film that you did with that director?" And I'm going, "Which film with which director?" You know, agents, oh God. Anyway, and I said, "Do you mean? Are you talking about Manhunter? Oh, Manhunter. That's the one, Manhunter." So this script looks very like that. And I said, "Well, the character I played was called Hannibal Lecter." And he said, "Oh no, this character is called," and this is interesting because it was they had a problem with the name. He's called Philby. And I thought, well, I don't know if that's related, but it turns out this was what they changed before they managed to do a deal on the name Hannibal Lecter, because apparently Michael Mann owned the rights of the name of Hannibal Lecter, and then he sold it back when they decided they can't call the character. They didn't want to call the character Philby, but go back to who it was. So that's what happened. And then he said, "Oh yeah, it's been offered to Tony." I said, "Oh, that's good." I said, "I think you'll enjoy it considerably." And then, of course, the whole Hannibal Lecter wars have gone on subsequently. But I did get a very nice mention recently in a thing called Collider, which they liked the fact that I was human as Hannibal Lecter. I never thought of him as particularly human, but I was happy for the compliment.
You might want to keep that side of your humanness to yourself. One last thing I should ask you, because it's also all included in the very reasonable price of the Clifton tickets, is your route apparently took you via a lascivious Princess Margaret.
Oh yeah.
God blimey. Tell more.
Well, when I was young, I was reasonably good looking. No, actually, I was quite good looking.
I missed my cue there.
No, you did. Anyway, what happened was that it was my birthday. It was my 23rd birthday, and I was doing a play called In Celebration. And Carl Toms, who was designing the investiture, it was the time of the investiture of Prince Charles as a Prince of Wales, and they were doing this big thing, and they decided to go to the theatre, and Tony Snowden was also responsible. So they all came to see this play that I was in with Alan Bates, Jimmy Bolam, a wonderful actress called Constance Chapman, and Bill Owen played my father. It was a beautiful play by David Storey, and it had been successful. So we were at the court, the Royal Court, and I arrived. They were all in Alan's dressing room, and I arrived slightly later than everybody, and I had a shower, and I had this new shirt, this red sort of Indian shirt on, collarless shirt. And I came in, and my hair was wet, and then I found myself immediately talking to Her Royal Highness, and she was very intrigued by my performance, and she said, "You were so wonderfully hooded. All evening I kept thinking, who is he? What is he? I really want to know him." And I went, "Oh, that's very nice of you, ma'am, thank you." She said, "Yes." I said, and she said, "It's your birthday, I hear." I said, "Yes, it's my birthday today." "Oh, happy birthday." And she said, "Yeah." And I said, I've just been given this shirt. And I was so naive. I said, "I've been given this shirt by Lindsay Anderson." "Oh, your shirt. It's a beautiful shirt." And she put her hands on the shirt and then ran her fingers down here and started unbuttoning my shirt. And her hand was on her way to my left nipple when I thought, I've got to get out of here bloody quick. this will be an incident. So I just went, Mom, I gotta go. Sorry, I've left the water running in my dressing room and I think there's going to be a flood, so I'm going to go. So I ran out. But meanwhile, Jimmy Bolam had been orchestrating the whole thing from here, going, ooh, ah, ooh. It was a very embarrassing incident. That's what happened.
I think you leave us on a note of exquisite embarrassment, rather hoping we could see it brought to the screen someday.
Maybe.
Just, anyone in the room connected to the Crown, you've all got Brian's agent's number, please get in touch. It's been an hour that's whizzed by for me. It felt like a particularly meaty episode of your extraordinary life. It is told with, I think, what we can hear with your wit, your understanding, I think, of acting is really something that is very, very noticeable about you, as you really understand the craft. There's so much about that here in the book and your life. It is also very touching and, of course, as you can gather, very funny too. Put The Rabbit in the Hat, available from all good bookshops, especially the one over there. Brian Cox.
Thank you.